All right, we are live, so I'm going to kick off the intro.
Well, the intro video didn't work. We'll get that to work in a little bit, but we had a really sluck graphic that we were going to do. It was, but we'll save that for the end maybe. So, want to welcome everybody to VictoriaMetrics first in our series of Tech Talks. My name is Mark Sherwood. I'm on our marketing team. And Matthias, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, I'm Matthias Palmersheim. I'm a solutions engineer at VictoriaMetrics, and I'm also a very happy VictoriaMetrics user.
And I got to apologize. I said Matthias, and it's Matthias. It's going to take a while for me to get
my name's been getting screwed up for 31 years. It's been a game for me now. Like, it's funny to me now when people mispronounce it. And I'm just like, when I see somebody stumble on my name a little bit, I'm just like, oh man, this is going to be good.
Well, mine's not as the same, but with the C and a K. C is the French spelling. So I'll get things written with a K. Once it was a speeding ticket. So I said it wasn't for me and I didn't have to pay. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, again, thanks for everybody who's tuning in and anyone who's going to watch this in follow-up. We're really excited to kick this series off. We've decided that we want to share some technical thoughts, conversations with different employees, users, and customers of VictoriaMetrics, just talking about the space, sharing some knowledge, opening up some discussions. So again, this is the first one. We're going to be talking about Blackbox monitoring. We'll get into exactly what that is shortly. But again, we're going to be sharing these via our community website. So if you want to stay up to date on what topics are coming up, interact with us to make suggestions for topics, please let us know. So sort of a little bit of a warm up and getting into what is this black box monitoring. Matthias, as you selected this topic, it must be something that resonates with you. And maybe I'm bringing up some trauma, but do you want to just sort of get into why this topic was something that you thought, hey, this is a good thing to kick off with?
Yep. So my opinion about observability is that, or maybe my controversial opinion about observability is making sure things are available is the most important thing. And there's been some times where things were not available because of SSL certificates. One of them was I was using Let's Encrypt at a web hosting company. And because most of the servers were on Windows, they couldn't use CertBot, which stays up to date. I'd use some weird Windows thing that didn't auto update, and it was issuing certificates from an expiring intermediary certificate. So you'd go in your browser and it would say like, oh, I expire in 80 days or whatever, but the intermediary certificate expired. And so people's websites were failing on a Friday. And these were mostly like bank websites. So people were having trouble accessing online banking on payday. And so I was getting a lot of flack from like angry customers, angry support people, angry salespeople while I'm trying to figure out what this is, because all the certs looked like they were working it up to date. And so then I had to run around and update all the Acme clients on all the servers on a Friday when I just wanted to go home.
Well, nobody does banking or anything online outside of the commerce hours of 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., do they?
Yeah, nobody gets paid on Friday either, right?
That's right. So, and I'm picking up from that then. Had you had a more in-depth monitoring solution to look at that problem, which is otherwise invisible, you might have been able to get ahead of it and enjoy your Friday?
Yeah. So at the time, most of our black box monitoring would have just been like the year cert that we sold you a year ago is about to expire, or relying on the automated Let's Encrypt is actually really cool. And it'll give you like, hey, we noticed the cert you issued 80 days ago is about to expire. You should probably do something about that.
Right. Well, perfect.
And there's another fun Let's Encrypt story here too. So the other one was I was running a bunch of Nginx reverse proxies for an API, and Let's Encrypt was successfully renewing. So this time, thankfully, I was on Linux, had auto update set up, and CertBot was issuing valid certificates and updating them. But by default, it doesn't reload Nginx. And so if you don't reload Nginx, it will still serve the old cert. And thankfully, I did have better black box monitoring. So I had like 13 days to be a bit more methodical and think out think about it rather than having like all these API servers fail.
Perfect. Now, we've said black box a number of times now, and I wonder if that we want to dive into what we define that as, because it sort of might have some ambiguity. So when you're saying into black box, looking at a black box, what does that mean?
So black box monitoring is monitoring a system or observing a system without outside knowledge. So in the case of SSL certificates, this would not be like you have an agent on a server that's reading a file. It's you have a server outside of your application, preferably like far away as possible. And then it's able to see what the user would actually be getting. So it gives you a user perspective of what the application is doing rather than relying on an inside view of it. So instead of it being, everything that is making up the service, you're just going to the service how a user would, where you're punching in an endpoint in a browser or in some client, and then it serves you a response and a hopefully valid certificate.
So we've covered some of the challenges in that, sort of the war stories of things that you've seen where black boxes can cause the problems when you don't know exactly what's going on with them. Are there other types of black boxes, just at a high level, like different apps or services that you would classify as a black box to sort of spread that net a little bit?
Do you mean like services that do black box monitoring?
No, well, primarily, what other types of services would you have that you'd say would be black box? Like, we know it's certs, it's the running on Nginx, these examples, but are there any other examples of things that you would consider black boxes that having additional monitoring, like we're going to talk about, would be helpful?
Yes. So there are some applications where you're not allowed to install an agent or something that would have inside knowledge, or they don't have an endpoint. So you would just go to, you would access them over like HTTP. If it's a DNS server, it would be DNS. And you could even use it to monitor things like VPN working or not. So a VPN should change your IP address, right? So you can use black box monitoring to go to a website like icanhasip.com. And then if it has your home IP address, then you could fire an alert saying that, hey, this thing isn't working. So the thing doing the monitoring doesn't have to know that it's on a VPN or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And then the cases we are going to cover today are HTTP, DNS, and ping. And there's definitely levels. Ping's like the simplest one because you're just answering an ICMP request, but sometimes that could be blocked on your network. And then the next level above that is just simply going to a website and looking at the response code and making sure there's a valid certificate. The next level above that is going to be looking for like a string in a response. And then we're not going to get here today, but the peak of this is you're performing a transaction on the website. So you're like doing a login event or clicking inside of a menu and making sure you're going to the correct web page.
So it sounds too then, an important part of this obviously is in the knowing what's in your applications and on your network, right? Is sort of getting an idea what I can see now, what I might not be able to see, and then being able to address those items, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Making sure we can get yelled at.
Yep, that's right. Not get yelled at, or get yelled at early. Right. So it sounds like, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say alert manager is much nicer than angry users. Mm-hmm. Usually, like the notifications I get inside of like iAlert or PagerDuty are way nicer than what angry users say to me.
That's it. Well, I once set up monitoring way back in the day, and I did it incorrectly. And the alerts were coming in so fast and furious that the alert log filled up the disk space, crashed the server, and then I was getting so many alerts that I just didn't even know what to do. I just sort of shut everything off and hid, which is not the right approach. So awesome.
That is definitely another war story about the time we found the rate limit for PagerDuty. Mm-hmm. We were running LDAP servers, and it was cooler after we had observability because you could see the like users get recreated and destroyed repeatedly. But it was firing so many alerts. PagerDuty's just like, we've had enough of you. We're not responding to you anymore.
Yeah, you didn't meet your own SLAs. They should have been fixed. Well, that's awesome. So if we kind of jump into then, now we have a background of what we are talking about as far as black box monitoring. We heard some of the examples of what are the stories, the war stories that could make us want to focus on this. Maybe we can dive into how is it being addressed today? Like, what would you say are the main options for black box monitoring? And then we can take a look at those pros and cons and see how they all stack up.
Yep. So there's in my head they kind of fall into three separate buckets. First one is going to be SaaS. We won't go over any specific SaaS solutions today. But the nice thing about those is that they'll put endpoints all over the world for you to configure, so you don't have to spin up like a virtual machine in every region inside of your cloud provider or put a data center everywhere around the world. And the other nice thing too is it's run by separate humans. So it's run by separate humans, so they're likely to fail at different times than you, because they'll have different people and processes that will fail differently than yours. So that way, if you're self-hosting something and that thing you're self-hosting is also monitoring something you're responsible for, it is way more likely that you push a bad networking config or do something that would drop both services at the same time. And then if that happens, you don't know that you broke everything. You're not getting yelled at by like automated notifications, so you think everything's okay, but really nothing's okay.
Yeah. So the quote I'm going to pull out of that is, you said humans will fail. So you're saying
yes,
humans should be replaced. I'm not sure if you're AI. I'm not sure if you're AI or not. Actually, I met you in person, so yeah.
I'm an AI pessimist. I'm not quite to doomer levels of AI, but
yeah, it still requires our brains to run through that.
Okay. Mike, do you have any packet loss going on? We have a couple of comments saying that your audio is a bit off.
Oh, my audio?
Yeah.
I can put my mic a little bit closer. That might.
All right. Mark, say some words.
Hello. These are words. I have some of the good words. Is that better?
Chat, let us know if Mark staying closer to the mic helps. Otherwise, we can do some troubleshooting real quick.
We did test this and everything was working. Remember, this is the first time. This is the soft opening of the Tech Talks.
Yeah. Oh, I think when you lean back, you drop below like a noise gate or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, then I will stay right where I am here so we don't mess with it. I apologize for that, everyone.
Just stand still. Perfect. Yeah. So the first bucket is SaaS. The nice thing about that is like most software as a service is they take care of a bunch of stuff for you. It's still on you to configure it correctly, but pretty much everything else is going to be their problem. And then the next solution is going to be using open source or self-hosted solutions. And the two we picked out for today are Gaddis and Uptime Kuma. So these are solutions that are targeted specifically just for black box monitoring. And they will have nice things built in, like, let me bring my screen share back. There we go. Sorry about that. So here we can see Gaddis has a nice status page. It tells you the status of all the checks and everything, and you could show this publicly. And Gaddis is driven completely by a config file, so it has a low threat surface. So you don't have to be as concerned about having another application that users could try to break into. And then the other one we picked was Uptime Kuma. Uptime Kuma is another great open source project. I actually used this for a couple of years before I moved to something else. And it wasn't because Uptime Kuma was bad. It was just I wanted something a little bit different. So Uptime Kuma, again, has this really nice internal interface. You get to configure everything through a GUI, which is something that is okay. Depending on who you're talking to, some people like doing everything as code and doing everything in config files on the CLI. But it's really nice if I just wanted to add a new website. I can just add in VictoriaMetrics.com here, rather than have to open up my text editor and deal with all of that nonsense. Another nice thing about these applications is everything's kind of contained or self-contained. So if you do want to use these for alerting, you don't have to set up a whole separate time series database, data visualization, and alerting pipeline. it's something that's completely self-contained. But if you do have those things, there can be a bit of it can be a source of confusion, because do I use the alerts built into Uptime Kuma, or do I use the alerts built into like Alert Manager?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, obviously, sorting that out. So avoiding getting into alert fatigue or wondering if you get alerts that are different from multiple systems, which one do you follow? So, yeah. And I also personally, as much as I like CLI and in on files, I find that having a good GUI also helps, because I can make adjustments and then go into the CLI or the configs and see what it changed. So it's a very good system for helping learn how to move to the CLI.
Yep. And Uptime Kuma, I believe there's like third-party plugins that add an API onto Uptime Kuma, but if you just like go to the GitHub page and set it up, there's no API by default. And then one other thing for the self-contained solutions is that high availability or doing a distributed deployment can be tricky, because Gaddis, you would have to deploy like multiple instances of Gaddis or Uptime Kuma around the world to get that information. And then if you want to figure out if something is down in one region, you have to go to the Uptime Kuma that's checking that region. So there's no single pane of glass with these. There is a way to graph that on, but then we're back to having, you have Uptime Kuma and you have your observability solution. So there's a few more moving parts that can be added there.
Yeah. And adding complexity to monitoring is not always ideal, right?
Yep. So then the third bucket of tools that we're going to have is the command line tools. So not command line tools, the black box agents. So I picked Telegraph because I've been using Telegraph since like 2019 to do all my observability stuff, or all my metric collection. So it was natural for me to start using that for Blackbox monitoring. And that's what I'm using in my production, which is really just the server rack in my basement. So that's what I'm using in my production today. And then the other one we did was Prometheus Blackbox Exporter. And so instead of having this lovely GUI where you can go through and configure everything, you will need to go through a config file. So let's get into that. And is my editor?
Yeah, we can.
Mark?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So for Telegraph, we have a config file here. So you do have to write 45-ish lines of text to do the VictoriaMetrics website and our docs website. So here what we're doing is we have an HTTP response, which is saying, hey, go to these URLs every minute and timeout after 30 minutes. And here we're massaging the data a little bit so it fits better inside of VictoriaMetrics, because Telegraph was built by Influx Data, and they focused on InfluxDB. So sometimes the data doesn't quite, the shape of the data makes sense for them. But if you're using another solution, which they have a ton of different output plugins, you do have to manipulate the data a bit before shipping it off. And then here we're adding a tag. So that way we have a human-friendly name rather than a URL. And same kind of workflow here. We're just going to the same websites, but this time we're only looking for the certificate. And then DNS queries, we're looking through Quad9 and Cloudflare's DNS for those two domains for A records, and then massaging the data so it fits better inside of VictoriaMetrics. And same thing with ping. Blackbox Exporter was unique to me. I'm used to things being like you configure everything directly inside of the config file, but the Blackbox Exporter, you configure a type of check inside of the Blackbox Exporter config, and then in Prometheus you go into the scrape config, and you have to configure a scrape job that says, hey, this is a Blackbox Exporter job. Use these labels to get Blackbox Exporter to go to the website and generate metrics. Which that was, yeah.
Was there anything in any of these configurations or anything that popped out to you as that you weren't thinking about needing to configure or set up previously? or like were these pre-built? Some of these, and you obviously have to populate them, or was all of this just what you put together?
I cite the sources in the Git repo for how I configured Blackbox exporter and everything. The Telegraph ones I used from my open source project called Shiftmon. And I just took the Blackbox dashboard and used the Grafana provisioning API to add it, and then copied the Telegraph configs and modified them a little bit. Since the code for Telegraph is machine generated, or yeah, it's a for loop with a Jinja template. So it's easier just to do one input plugin per, rather than try to shove all the URLs inside of one instance of the input plugin, especially if they have like different timeouts or different parameters.
So if anyone wants to play along with this after in the GitHub repo, you'll have a good sample recipes in here effectively.
Yep. On the VOD, it should be in the description, and then there will be a companion blog post hopefully done by the end of this week. I had some fun distractions. We have a foster dog, and we had to get her ready to get adopted. So,
yes. And you've had a number of foster dogs, haven't you? Like that's something that's a big part of life for you guys.
Yeah, she's the fourth one. It's a bit stressful, and so like after they get adopted and we get some peace and quiet, we're like, we're never going to do this again. And then we get a sob story, and we're like, I can't say no to that face.
That's great. Yeah, and often in his calls, you'll see a couple of dogs come in, maybe a cat pop up, and it's always fun.
Yeah, I've debated having a second webcam just for the dogs, but
that would be another TikTok. Your fuzz cam.
Yeah, the fuzzy cam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of ways of getting all this cool data. Like we have the built-in dashboards for Gaddis and Uptime Kuma are cool, but what if we wanted to like put that together with the rest of our observability suite? What would that look like?
Yeah, let's take a peek.
So here, the Telegraph config, if you want, I can generate the metrics on the terminal, but it's just a mess of influx protocol. So here we have the number of health checks that are generated, and then we break it out into each, I call it a family of checks. So the HTTP checks, the DNS checks, and we don't have any TCP checks today. Those are a little bit trickier to set up. Or TCP is easy, but UDP can be hard because it's a stateless protocol, so you have to have a response. And then also we have the TLS certificate time. Nothing's going to expire. And then one nice thing about the Telegraph the Telegraph X509 plugin is that it spells out each when each certificate is going to expire. And if we go over to the Blackbox exporter, I believe the certificate duration, you just get when the next SSL cert expires. So I know that this cert will expire in 2 months, but I don't know if it's called the leaf certificate or the certificate that users actually see, or if it was just signed by somebody with an outdated CA. And so here's the dashboard we get from the Prometheus Blackbox exporter. And so this gives you one nice thing that the Blackbox exporter provides is not only how long the response time was, like the Telegraph plugin or Uptime Kuma or Gaddis, but it actually will spell out how much of the time was spent on the DNS lookup and how long it took for transfer and those sorts of things. So we can see that in this panel here. Let me zoom in a bit. We can see in this panel here, we're not only getting the total response time, but we get that broken out into how much time was it handling a TLS or moving data and those sorts of things. So if you're troubleshooting like a slow response time, that could be very useful.
Like these dashboards are showing a ton of really useful and great data. But how do we prevent having more things to just stare at and look for problems in here? Right. So now,
so that would be alerting. So we have rules here for, we have some recording rules for Uptime Kuma, And then we have the black box alerts for Telegraph. So I wasn't able to get this by editing the host file. So give me 1 second to break it in my router. We do have a talk plan called Stop Babysitting Your Dashboards for alerting. So look for that in the future. While I'm getting that set up, Mark, do you have any fun war stories of random websites breaking?
Oh, I've broken a number of things. I should honestly never be responsible for the maintenance or the upkeep and uptime of a website. I think honestly that setting up that monitoring, and it was a startup that we took over, 3 of us who were employees, and we were just trying to get everything running, focusing on all sorts of problems. And that monitoring and alerting was going to be, that was the greatest thing we were going to do, at least to help me on the infrastructure side. But I've broken a number of things. I don't know if less monitoring. I think the monitoring would be keeping me away from terminal would be the best thing to do. If Mark opens terminal and types sudo, that's it. It just kick him out.
So we need to find a metric to see how often the terminal app gets open on your machine, and then have a success KPI tied to how often you open up the terminal.
Yeah, we'll have to set some rules in that for sure.
All right, so now we should see, I just turned on a firewall rule that blocks this VM from accessing VictoriaMetrics.com.
Why would you do
so
that?
We're not getting a response from here on ping. And we should see these reach a pending state, and we should see the checks in Uptime, Kuma, and Gaddis start to go red as well. And then while we're waiting for that, it is possible to make a new status page.
Oh,
there we go. Yeah. That's one thing that's really nice about Uptime Kuma is you get those really well-built notifications inside of the application.
Yep.
Status.
Yeah, those definitely do stand out right away as, hey, this requires some attention. I think actually that's handy.
And then here we can also add in a dashboard, but we would have to add some services to it really quick.
Yeah, and one of the other things too that sort of just popped into my mind, I remember when we were discussing this and going through what we could talk about, you were talking about some negative checks as well. So
oh yeah, the upside down checks.
Upside down, that's right. Yeah.
Yep. So Uptime Kuma has this built in, and that's something that sticks out about it. And there's 2 use cases for it. One's practical, and one is for the tinfoil hat crowd. So the one for the tinfoil hat crowd is called a warrant canary. So some organizations are concerned about a weird US law where you can get a warrant from the government that comes with, it's called a gag order, where you are not allowed to disclose that you received a warrant from the government. And so the poorly legal tested hack, I am also not a lawyer, and this is definitely not legal advice, is to put something on your website that says, hey, we've never received a warrant from the United States government. And then if they do receive that warrant, they took it down because you're not saying something, you're not disclosing it, you're just stopping saying something. And the theory is that that's okay because you're not disclosing it, you're just stopped broadcasting something. That's the tinfoil hat use case. The one that I actually use at home is that I'm concerned about where my kids go on the internet, as everyone should. And so I want to make sure that the only hub that my kids are going to is either GitHub or Docker Hub. And so I have a check that will notify me if Blocky, which is a DNS filter, it's similar to Pi-hole or AdGuard Home, will prevent my children from accessing those websites through DNS. So instead of returning an real IP address, it'll return zeros. And so if I see that from the kids network, if they're able to look up those domains, then that's a problem, or get a non-zero response from those domains. That's a problem.
Right. Interesting. Just curious if anyone else that's listening to the stream has used upside down checks for anything else. When Matthias first told me about it, that was a pretty interesting methodology I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah. Mark, you're still, I think, wiggling and cutting in and out. Oh. I think we might need to test your audio settings for next time.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if my mic, I apologize. Here,
and then Gaddis, we did have to refresh, but we're seeing the VictoriaMetrics checks start to fail right now. And the nice thing about having the DNS level checks and the HTTP level checks is that we can see that we can resolve the domain, but for some reason we're unable to access it. And then if we wanted to look at the alert rules as well, we're starting to see the Blackbox ping and HTTP checks fail. And if we go back to the dashboard for Blackbox monitoring, we're starting to see 3 of the 4 checks are coming back unhealthy. Actually, did I find a... Oh, I think it got grouped funny when it started failing. I might have a bug I get to fix after this. But yeah, we are starting to see those checks fail. Then I did not set up PagerDuty for this, so we still have a couple minutes to see them fail. Oh, nope, they are firing now. So here we see everything's firing, everything's red. Right now I'm using the null alerting endpoint, so that way I don't have to set up any I don't have to set up like email or any sort of notifications. And then Mark, is your audio working? I cannot hear you. Sorry, I didn't see your lips moving. We lost Mark. Mark should be back. So yeah, we have the alerts that are now failing while we are waiting for Mark to come back. And then once we allow traffic to flow to those websites, so the firewall rule has been updated. We're going to confirm that in our terminal. We should see those lights start to go from red to green again. We can split out our browser here. Yep, we can see right away that Uptime Kuma caught it on the next check, and we're getting green lights here. And if we refresh Gaddis, we can see everything as well. Mike, Mike.
So, are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Chrome came up with kill pages or wait. They're just, of course, it's the demo gods or presentation gods have come to say hi to me today. Sorry.
Yeah. Because everything went off without a hitch when we tested it too.
Yeah. That's the joy of going live. So I did miss the last minute, Matthias, so I apologize if there was anything you needed me for on that.
Nope. I was just unbreaking things.
Mm.
So here we're seeing Gaddis go back to green now for everything, as well as Uptime Kuma, and that came up right away. And if we go back to the status page, we can see those 3 services are there. We can go to the dashboard here. So it's nice that it has a separate internal and external dashboard too, because if you wanted to check, like, if you had a load balancer or something like that, you could privately show each individual origin behind that load balancer, but only to your users or only to internal people, and then the world could see your status page saying that, hey, the service is down, not an instance of the service is down.
Mhm.
Because most users don't really care about that level of granularity.
Yeah, they don't know is working or not, and then that's the internal stuff is is for the team who runs it. All right.
So hopefully this will turn green as well, but yeah. And then the other one advantage I forgot to mention about using a time series database for this, or using agents and a time series database for this, is that you can store things long-term much easier. So by default, I know Uptime Kuma uses a SQLite database, and at small scales and for short retention periods, that's fine. But as your workload scales, you're probably going to hit a ceiling for how well you can store those analytics over time. Mm-hmm. And then you also are not able to do SLOs over custom periods of times and those sorts of like fancy functions you can inside of a time series database like VictoriaMetrics. So one example we have here is recording rules, where recording rule is pretty much a query that runs periodically and then stores the results back in a time series database. You could do this either with VictoriaMetrics to VictoriaMetrics, or if you're using something that doesn't generate metrics but you have logs, you can use a similar strategy and then send that data from VictoriaMetrics, or send those recording rules back so you can generate SLOs and SLIs. And I might have misspoke a little bit, but you can use Gaddis and Uptime Kuma to generate metrics as well. So if you did want to track your SLAs inside of your existing observability solution with Uptime Kuma, you can. So you can sort of have your cake and eat it too, where you get the awesome web GUI that Uptime Kuma has for creating and managing the checks and generating status pages. But then you could store the results of those checks inside of something like a time series database or VictoriaMetrics to track the information over longer periods of time.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm going to double check our notes, but I don't think we had anything else we needed to cover.
No, so I'm just I think for our first go around in here, we got our technical challenges out of the way. On my part, I apologize, but I'm hoping that everybody found this informative. If there's any questions or anything anyone has, please let us know. Again, one of the things we'd like to do is to ask anyone if there's any topics that you would like to have covered or of interest. Let us know. We've got a proposed content calendar for this. We'll also share that in the blog post, sort of what we're looking at is coming up. And we definitely encourage you, if you found this useful or not useful, and hoping to see if we have more, if we have improvement, or if we have continued to have these issues, please, we encourage you to stay on top of our Tech Talks. They're going to be monthly. We're going to have Matthias and I, and then other guests and multiple topics. So I want to thank everybody for joining. And Matthias, thank you so much for all the work getting this set up and the great presentation.
Thanks. And thanks for all your help with this too.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. And what we'll aim to is next month, my microphone is going to work a whole lot better.
Great.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks again, everyone. And we'll look forward to our next session.
See everyone. Bye.